Our story kicks off in the year 421 in the Kingdom of Granbold, and this fortress is humanity's last refuge where the few survivors have gathered for one final battle. Inside the walls, the soldiers face reality, clinging to a sliver of hope to survive the onslaught. With that, fear is written all over everyone's faces. As the cause of the attack is revealed, a swarm of dragons soaring through the skies. One of these dragons fires a massive energy beam that heads straight for the castle, destroying everything in its path. And this attack leaves a gaping hole in the wall. Taking advantage of the breach, an army of monsters invades the place, storming over the bodies of the fallen. And in no time, all the humans were being overwhelmed. Thus, humanity's fate is sealed, as defeat is inevitable against such powerful enemies. And after the fall of humanity's last line of defense, it seems the end of the human race is closer than ever. Meanwhile, a few survivors run into a building and a voice shouts, calling for the next person. Inside, the place serves as a makeshift infirmary filled with wounded soldiers on their last legs. And the person with healing powers was Will, who was tirelessly healing all the injured. He then says he will heal everyone, asking them to bring the wounded as quickly as possible. A soldier then arrives and calls for Lord Will, telling him to flee because the gate is about to be breached by the enemy, and says it's too dangerous for a healer of his level to be on the front lines. At this, Will gets furious and questions him for suggesting he abandon his comrades. He refuses to give up and says that as long as he keeps healing, humanity will not be extinguished. At that moment, he remembers a wounded woman who placed all her faith in his power. He also recalls the words of a man who named him the #1 healer in the world. Back in the present, someone calls out for Lord Will. It was a soldier desperately looking for him. He was carrying the army's general, who was gravely wounded. The men place the general on the ground, and Will tells them to lay him right there. Ignoring the imminent danger, he confidently states that he will save the general, and shouts that saving people is the real reason he is there. He then focuses an absurd amount of healing energy into the injured general's body. The magic is so strong that it radiates an insane amount of energy everywhere, surprising everyone nearby. As a result, the soldier's arm begins to recover until it finally returns to normal. All the surrounding soldiers are stunned by the result of his incredible healing ability. With that, the general, who was at death's door, finally opens his eyes, looking completely recovered. The soldiers celebrate because their leader has awakened thanks to Will. Will then says that no matter how injured the general is, he will always heal him to ensure victory. But the general starts staring at his own arm, which was just restored, and then his expression completely changes to a look of pure rage. Out of nowhere, the general lands a solid punch right across Will's face and says the healer did something unnecessary. Will is left on the ground completely confused, and the soldiers ask why he is doing this, but the furious general screams for everyone to shut it. He then draws his sword, preparing to attack Will. Will is shocked to see the attack coming his way, but he can't react in time, and the general runs the sword through the very person who had just saved him. The general was furious, blaming Will for not letting him pass on in peace. He says a healer who stays in the rear would never understand their suffering and despair, and that whenever they think the end has come, they are healed only to fight and suffer all over again. He then claims that all the other soldiers feel the same way and no longer want to fight. Will looks at the other soldiers and sees on their faces the same exhaustion and despair the general described. He is in shock, thinking that all his effort to save people was for nothing. He thinks about all his sweat and tears and even coming to the front lines, but it was all pointless. The general then pulls the sword out of Will and says has tired of suffering because of him. Then he raises his sword and says that if Will wants to fight, he can fight alone because humanity is already doomed. Will panics because he knows his class can't use any type of attack magic. Then the general and the other soldiers turn their backs on Will, abandoning him to his fate. At that exact moment, a dragon in the sky prepares a powerful energy attack in its mouth. The creature then unleashes a massive blast of fire that destroys what was left of the castle. Amidst the dust and rubble, Will sits alone, waiting for his end. Lying on the ground and near his end, the general uses his last words to tell everyone to get out of there, and is then crushed by a piece of rubble, putting an end to his life. Will shields himself from another explosion that goes off right in front of him. At that moment, he finally understands why he was betrayed by his comrades. Then Will realizes that the people he was healing were facing terrifying monsters like that dragon. He admits to himself that he just watched everything from a distance without truly understanding their pain. Filled with rage, he regrets all the time he spent learning healing magic, because it was all a waste. In a flashback, Will remembers that since he was a child, he had a great talent for healing others. Another memory surfaces, showing the day he received the honor of being the best healer in the world. Amidst despair and regret, he screams that he should have fought with his own two hands. As a final act of defiance, he he picks up a rock from the ground to face the creature. Without a second thought, he runs toward the giant dragon, wishing for a second chance. Will laments, saying that if he could go back in time, he would do everything differently. He stares his end in the face as the dragon prepares to devour him in a single bite. But amidst so much blood, a glimmer of hope appears, and this glimmer completely changes Will's destiny. Unexpectedly, he opens his eyes, completely confused by the situation. He then gets out of bed and looks out the window, realizing he is no longer on the battlefield. Will is totally baffled and wonders where he is because that room looks very familiar. Looking at his nightstand, he notices a mysterious letter on it. He immediately recognizes the envelope and realizes it's an academy enrollment guide. This makes him nervous because the presence of that letter means he has gone back in time. He remembers that this was the day of his enrollment in the academy, which happened 5 years ago. Now in the year 416, he wonders if he wasn't taken out by the dragon. He has returned to 1 week before entering the Healing Magic Academy and can't believe it. Will then realizes his last wish was granted and he has been given a second chance. With the letter in his hands, he crushes the paper with all his might because he already knows what he needs to do. Will decides that this time he will enroll in the academy specializing in attack magic, but there is a rule that says healing mages can't use offensive magic and he intends to break it. He knows he will face many challenges, but with his memories and mastery of healing, he can change the future. Now with a new goal, he vows that he will fight with his own hands to save the world. Will decides his first step is to get into the best offensive magic academy in the world, the Schwarz Academy. The education there is known to be excellent, turning anyone into an elite mage. And no matter how untalented a person is, the academy guarantees they will become a first-class mage. He remembers that in his past life he met an incredible person who also came from this academy, but their teaching method is top secret, so the only way to learn is by enrolling there. The problem is there has never been a case of a healing mage enrolling there, so he doesn't know what to do. He thinks maybe the secret is money, since nobles always enroll their untalented children there. Will regrets not bringing the money from his past life, as the reward he earned was for a lifetime. He realizes that even if he starts working as a healer now, he won't get the money in time. At that moment, a female voice calls to him, asking if he is awake yet. When he turns around, he is shocked because the person at the door is his sister, who was gone in his previous life. Seeing her there in front of him, he finally understands that he has returned to the past and his sister is alive. The girl asks what's wrong and he plays it off, saying something got in his eye, and wishes her a good morning. With a smile on her face, she replies, wishing her brother a good morning. Will thinks that in this life he can use his magic to prevent the tragedy that will befall her. Suddenly he gets an idea, and it seems he has finally found the solution to his problem. He then thanks his sister very enthusiastically, saying that thanks to her everything might work out. Will says he is going out for a bit, but promises to talk properly when he gets back home. The scene cuts to the Federation of Magic Academies, an organization that controls all magical education in the kingdom. The president of this federation was also the headmaster of Schwarz Academy, but he almost abandoned his post for one reason. Will then goes to the headmaster's mansion to put his plan into action. Arriving there, he peeks through the window and sees the old man taking care of a girl lying in bed. The young woman seems to be very ill and suffering from a high fever. The headmaster touches her face with an expression of sadness and concern. This man is Aniclimax, the headmaster of the academy, and the girl is his granddaughter Marie. Aniclimax apologizes because today's healer wasn't enough, but promises he will find someone to cure her. At that time, the headmaster spent all his time caring for his granddaughter's illness. But the healing magic of that era was not able to save her, and unfortunately she passed away. However, that was the story of his past life, and now everything can be different. Will then appears at the window and offers to take on the role of healing the girl. The headmaster recognizes Will, who was entering his room through the window. He calls him by name and identifies him as the scholarship student from the Healing Academy, leaving Will surprised. Aniclimax says Will's talent is well known, but he didn't expect him to be the type to break into houses. Will gives an awkward laugh and explains that after kicking the bucket once, he ended up getting a bit bolder. He gets serious and says there was no time to waste for either him or the headmaster's granddaughter. With all the confidence in the world, he claims he can cure the girl's illness. Suspicious, the old man asks what Will's true objective is in offering to help. Will replies that can wait and asks for permission to treat her as the disease is progressing quickly. The two then stare each other down in a tense moment, with the girl's life hanging in the balance. After some thought, the headmaster finally agrees to let Will try to save her. Will then sits beside Mary's bed while the old man watches his every move. He gets a little nervous with the pressure of the situation and feels the headmaster's intense gaze, as if any mistake could cost him his life. Will takes a deep breath to calm down and focus on the task ahead. He then holds Mary's hand, preparing to begin the healing process. Will starts using his magic and an intense green light illuminates the room as the headmaster watches in awe. He thinks that returning to the past has reduced his mana, but he still remembers all the healing formulas. Will knows the girl's illness is Zora's disease and the cure would only be discovered 2 years in the future. But with his advanced knowledge he manages to perform the spell, and the girl finally opens her eyes. Seeing that she is better, he says it's good to see her awake and feeling well. With a confident smile, he assures the young woman that she will be fine from now on. Will advises that her stamina is low, so she needs to rest a lot to fully recover. Seeing Will as a Prince Charming, the girl agrees while blushing completely. The headmaster approaches worriedly and asks his granddaughter Marie if she is really okay. With a smile on her face, she confirms that she is and says she hasn't felt so comfortable in a long time. Aniclimax is visibly moved to see that his granddaughter is finally cured of the deadly disease. Will watches the scene, happy to have saved her life and changed the future. The old man then covers his granddaughter with the blanket and lets her rest peacefully. Later the two sit down to talk and Aniclimax thanks Will. He promises to do anything for Will, and the young man thanks him, saying his request is not difficult at all. Will begins by explaining that his healing magic is already top-notch and there is nothing left for him to learn in that field. Then he finally makes his request and asks to be admitted to Schwar's academy. The headmaster is shocked and questions if he understands what it means for a talent like his to go to an offensive academy. With all the certainty in the world, the young man replies yes and that he knows exactly what he is doing. Aniclimax sees the determination in Will's eyes and realizes he is not kidding. With that, the old man stands up and says his authority as headmaster exists for moments exactly like this. He then turns to Will and with a confident smile states that he will take care of everything. And just like that, Will's enrollment is approved and the two seal the deal with a handshake. This simple handshake represents the beginning of a new journey for the healer. Elsewhere, a man complains that the sly old fox is back and is already doing absurd things. With a malicious smile, he wonders if a healer will be able to handle the academy's curriculum. Looking at Will's file, he scoffs, saying that a healing mage is a weakling. Time passes and the day of the academy entrance ceremony finally arrives. Headmaster Aniclimax introduces himself to the new students with an imposing and serious posture. Schwar's Academy is a boarding school specializing in attack magic with a unique curriculum and several training grounds. In addition, the academy has state-of-the-art research facilities and super-equipped laboratories. It also boasts a gigantic library with a huge collection of books available to students. Its graduates are very influential and receive various forms of support from the kingdom, becoming elite mages. That is why there is no better environment to study offensive magic than this place. But Will knows there has never been a case of a healer enrolling there, so many difficulties await him. Even so, he believes that by studying here he can become an attack mage and change his tragic past. Will remembers his horrible end at the hands of the dragon, and this fills him with determination. With a confident look, he vows to himself that in this place he will change his destiny. Time passes and during a practical class he seems to be having a lot of difficulty. An instructor then gives him the order to begin training on a target dummy, and Will tries to cast a fire spell. However, despite all his efforts, he realizes he can't cast the attack magic properly. The instructor then says he failed again and the other students laugh at his lack of talent. He forbids him from attending classes until he can pierce the target and sends him to train alone. Will then asks the instructor for help, saying that this way he doesn't even know how to practice, but the instructor disdainfully replies that teaching a healer like him would be a complete waste of time. Will asks to study in the library, but he refuses, saying there are no books for him and threatens him with punishment. At that moment, a blonde student behind them gives a very wicked smile and attacks Will with a fireball in the back, saying he was in the way. The attack sends Will flying to the ground without any chance to defend himself. The aggressor even mocks him, asking if he can't even dodge a simple blow like that. The blonde kid says this is an attack academy, and there is no place for a weakling who can't protect himself. He even claims that it's always the fault of the one who gets hit. The instructor agrees with the student and suggests that Will transfer to a healing academy. The kid continues the mockery, saying that there he can be comforted by his little healer buddies, while the others laugh at Will. Later that night, Will is sitting alone on the training ground, completely frustrated. He thinks there is no sign that he will be able to master attack magic this way. He then concludes that he knew it would be difficult, as healing and attack magic use different power sources. Magic works by converting the mind's power called mana through magical formulas. Mana can be calm for healing or active for attacking, and healers only possess calm mana. But Will knows the academy has a method to train mages from scratch and refine active mana. He is confident in his mana control and believes he can learn to convert his energy. The problem is he can't even go to classes, and he didn't expect everyone to despise healers so much. Even with everything going wrong, Will stands up determined because he can't afford to give up. He remembers that person from his past life who also started with little mana and trained here. With this, he realizes that continuing to train blindly won't help and thinks about sneaking into the library. Suddenly, a mysterious voice calls out to him, asking what he he is doing there so late at night. Will gets all flustered and tries to apologize for being around the place alone. Then the wind starts to blow as the mysterious figure slowly approaches him. And that person is someone he knew very well. It was a girl with light blue eyes and white hair. She is the person who was constantly in his memories. Will is completely shocked and calls her Veronica. Will remembers that in his past life he fought alongside Veronica on the battlefield, and she was an elite attack mage. He also recalls her tragic end where the mage ended up passing away in his arms during the war. Back in the present, Will thinks that her magic sword could cut through anything in an instant. Suddenly, Veronica draws her sword with a serious expression, and he is surprised by her action. The white-haired girl says she saw a suspicious student lurking around, and being on guard is natural. With that, she asks if he is causing trouble or is just an overly enthusiastic guy. Will panics because he knows she is different from the others, and if she attacks him, it's game over. Then Veronica accepts his excuse and sheathes her sword, seeming satisfied with his answer. Will then asks if she is Veronica, and the girl confirms her identity, but the young woman finds the way he spoke to her strange and questions him about it. Will is confused and thinks she is a teacher because in his past life she wasn't much older. Veronica then explains that she skipped a few grades and became a teacher shortly after. The young man feels awkward, but understands that with her talent it is completely understandable. At that moment he realizes this is a great opportunity for his plan to succeed. Will believes that if it's her, perhaps Veronica is the only person capable of teaching him attack magic. The white-haired girl continues to stare at Will with a very serious and intimidating gaze. Unfazed, Will says he wants to take classes with Professor Veronica, leaving the young woman a bit surprised. In a very excited tone, he then asks how he can sign up for her class, but Veronica explains that she doesn't have any classes yet because she skipped so many grades she barely had normal classes. She says that this year she is working as an assistant instructor to help students with their questions. The professor laments that for some reason no one ever comes to her with any questions. Will then thinks that everyone is probably afraid of someone who draws their sword so quickly. Seeing this as a great chance, he asks if he can ask a question, and she agrees since it's her job. Will gets straight to the point and asks what a healer needs to do to learn attack magic. Veronica then says she had already noticed something strange in the young man's mana flow. With that, she recognizes him as the freshman healer who enrolled in the academy. Will is surprised that she knew about him, and the girl says his case is quite peculiar. He explains that if the method to create dynamic mana exists, he should be able to do it, and she confirms that yes. Will gets super excited with the answer, but the professor quickly throws a bucket of cold water on him. She then states that with that, it would be impossible for him to use any type of offensive magic. The professor explains that the problem is the amount of static mana Will already possesses. Therefore, even if he cultivates dynamic mana, it will end up dissolving into the static mana, and the attack formula won't work. The young man then asks if there is no way for a healer to use attack magic, but Veronica says she doesn't know of any. Will is devastated by the news but doesn't give up and decides that if a method doesn't exist, he will create one himself. He then thanks the professor for her help and says he will think a little more about the matter on his own. But as he turns to leave, Veronica calls him and says she is not finished speaking. The white-haired girl reveals that although a healer can't use attack magic, there is a way to become an offensive mage. Will is completely confused by the revelation and asks what she means by that. She then shows him her sword and explains that it is made of iron and is used to cut and defeat enemies. Next, Veronica points to the wooden bench that is nearby. The professor says that is a wooden bench and its main function is for people to sit on, but she lifts the bench with one hand and says it can also be used to defeat an opponent. She explains that the use of anything is free and you don't have to stick to the object's original purpose. Veronica then approaches and shows her gloved hand to Will. With a gentle gesture, she touches the young man's face and says she can use her hand to caress him. Her touch leaves Will completely flustered and a little embarrassed by the situation, but suddenly she slaps him hard across the face, surprising him with her action, and asks if it was too hard. Veronica then summarizes that everything depends on how you use something and anything can become a weapon. With that, a light bulb goes off in Will's head and he wonders if he can use healing magic to attack. The white-haired girl gives a very confident smile, as if she already knew the answer to his question. Will wonders why he never thought of that, and she explains it's because of the nature of the mind and mana of each person. That is why attack mages are not interested in healing, and vice versa, as their natures are opposite. But the professor says that Will is probably different from other mages. She states that he is already unique for entering the academy and that his mana is not that of a pure healer. The young man is surprised and wonders if this happened because he went back in time. Then the white-haired points her sword at him and says he needs to become aware of this. Veronica tells him to awaken awaken the aggressive passion that exists within him to unleash his true power. She guarantees that if he does that, his healing magic will surely crush all his enemies. The next day, all the students gather again in the training courtyard for another class. Will is thoughtful as he remembers the conversation he had with Professor Veronica the night before. He finds her analogy unique and her words truly revealing for him. Will also finds it strange that she showed no rejection of him being a healer. At that moment, the instructor calls him healer, and Will realizes he has stopped calling him by his name. The man announces that today's class will be one-on-one mock battles and Will also participate. He adds that it's Will's problem if he can't use attack magic, and that he will reap what he sows. With a wicked smile, the instructor reveals that he has already decided the pairs for the battles, and to no one's surprise, he pits Will against the bully student Opus. The young man thinks the choice of pairing was quite deliberate, and the professor gives a satisfied smile. Opus Omen is from a famous noble family and is always surrounded by his followers. Will knows he is not just a rich kid, but also an excellent offensive mage. The bully then starts taunting him, saying that healing magic can't cure shame. Will puts on a forced smile, but inside he is starting to get very irritated. He decides he will test Professor Veronica's theory and try to fight back a little. The healer then calls the instructor and says he has something to talk to him about. He raises a finger and says he won't give up, but he has a small proposal for the fight. Will says he understands he has no talent and that if he loses the fight, he will leave the academy. The instructor smiles and praises his decision, calling it a very wise choice. But Will reveals his condition and asks if in case he wins, he can attend normal classes. Opus bursts out laughing and says there is no problem, as a weakling like him needs emotional support. With a wicked smile, he says that if he has nothing to break, he won't have any fun at all. The professor then agrees to the proposal, saying it is a waste of time to discuss impossible things. He tells the two to take their positions and prepare for the start of the combat. With a shout, the instructor raises his arm and gives the signal for the mock battle to finally begin. The bully immediately starts chanting a powerful spell, concentrating a large amount of energy. A magic circle appears and he creates several fire knives that float around him. Opus brags about his knife creation magic and says he will skewer Will with them. He then launches all the knives towards Will, who has no way to dodge the attack, but instead of panicking, Will concentrates and begins to prepare a mysterious spell. He puts his hands together and a green magic circle appears in front of him, ready to be activated. With a determined look, his eyes glow with an intense green, showing that he is ready for battle. Using his healing magic to manipulate life activities, he manages to dodge all the fire knives. Opus is completely shocked and can't believe what just happened right in front of him. The healer explains that his magic is the manipulation of life, and he can strengthen his body to the limit. The bully gets furious and tells him not to get cocky for getting lucky just once. Will then uses physical enhancement to drastically increase his strength and speed. With a quick movement, he picks up one of the fire knives that fell on the ground. The young man then uses the knife to deflect and break all the others coming his way. The broken knives fall to the ground, and the young man prepares for his next move. With a confident smile, Will says that was perfect for his plan. He then holds the knife firmly, preparing to use it against his opponent. With a determined look, Will says he will borrow the knife and imbues it with his own energy. All the students are shocked and wonder what happened, as they thought he could only use healing magic. One of the students realizes he didn't use an attack spell, but rather his own healing magic as a weapon. The bully gets angry for being tricked and prepares to attack with even more force. Opus shouts that he was just holding back and summons an even larger number of fire knives. Furious, the bully launches a shower of fire knives, saying it is impossible for an attack mage to lose to a healer, but with his enhanced speed, Will dodges all the knives with impressive agility. He destroys each of the magic weapons with ease, leaving his opponent frustrated and out of options. Opus shouts that's not just about the number of knives and begins to concentrate his mana for a new attack. He then increases the size of a single knife, turning it into a giant fire sword. The healer recognizes his opponent's strength and admits he has a good understanding of his unique magic. To make the blow even more deadly, the bully adds a spinning motion to the giant sword. He launches the spinning weapon towards Will, who prepares for the impact. The sword hits the ground with tremendous force, creating a large explosion and kicking up a lot of dust, but to Opus' surprise, the attack did not have the expected effect, and he is shocked by the result. The bully grinds his teeth in anger for not being able to hit his opponent. He then shouts in frustration for not being able to land even a single blow on the healer. Will wonders if he should strengthen his body even more to end the fight. Then Will bats the giant sword away with a single strike, leaving Opus completely stunned. The sword crashes against a pillar, and the bully shouts that it's impossible for him to have so much strength. Taking advantage of his opponent's distraction, Will appears behind him with the knife in hand. He then moves in to finish the fight with a single swift and precise blow, but before he could land the hit, the instructor shouts that it's enough, and the ground begins to shake. A stone wall erupts from the ground, separating the two and throwing the healer back. The huge stone wall interrupts the fight and leaves a mark of destruction in the academy courtyard. The professor tells the two to back away as the next battle will begin shortly. Opus is left on the ground in shock, and Will approaches approaches him with the knife in hand. With a victorious smile, Will asks the instructor if he can now attend normal classes. Annoyed and with no choice, the man grinds his teeth and tells him to do whatever he wants. The healer breaks into a huge grin and thanks him for the opportunity. He then turns and walks away, leaving the bully on the ground, and the instructor looking none too pleased. As he walks, Will thinks about the feeling he had during the fight. He realizes that this is his version of attack magic, and that everything went better than he imagined. The young man is happy because he knows that thanks to Professor Veronica, he can finally become an attack mage. With a satisfied smile, he looks up at the sky, grateful for the new chance he received. The sun rises on a new day at Shore's Academy as the school's flag flutters in the wind. Meanwhile, the bully, still on the ground, complains to the professor about what happened in the fight. The instructor helps him up, and the boy mentions he doesn't want to bother his father with this. With a wicked smile, he asks if the instructor got the message he just sent. The man adjusts his glasses and replies that he got the kid's thinly veiled threat loud and clear, but with a malicious look he vows that he will not let a healer think he is all-powerful. Next we see Will finally in a normal classroom with the other students. Will is happy because he can now attend classes and will learn everything about offensive magic. Then the instructor enters the classroom and all the students watch him in silence. The professor looks at the class with a serious expression and then gives a small smirk. He then announces that the class will be about creating magic tools and that the content is basic for now. Will finds this quite nostalgic as he had a similar class at the Healing Academy. The task for the day is to make ice bombs, and the instructor shows a diagram on the blackboard. With that, he distributes the materials and tells the students to infuse mana into them and assemble them. Will remembers that in his past life he only made recovery items and that here they make weapons. He knows that the tool's function depends on the materials, so the nature of the mana doesn't matter much. With this, Will concludes that he can do the class without any apparent problems. He opens the bag and takes out an ice golem fragment and a powdered flame tree branch. Following the book's instructions, he begins to mix the ingredients to create the ice bomb. But when he picks up the crystal fragment, something unexpected happens, and he feels a strange power. Suddenly, a body enhancement magic hits one of the students, sending him flying. Immediately after, a large ice explosion occurs right in the middle of the classroom. The ice spreads everywhere, freezing some desks and scaring the students. Will is shocked and has no idea what just happened in front of him. The instructor then yells at him, asking what he thinks he is doing in the middle of class. The young man tries to explain, but the professor doesn't want to hear excuses and penalizes him with a loss of points. With this, Will becomes frustrated with the professor's attitude and the unfair situation. Meanwhile, Opus and his friend laugh at the healer's misfortune. The bully watches him with a look of contempt and satisfaction at seeing him in trouble. Will then stands up with a serious expression, determined not to let it slide. The healer thinks he needs to focus as it's time for the next class to begin. The next lesson was on magical creatures, and for the demonstration the professor brought a salamander in a cage. Will sits at his desk and watches the small fire creature that was in front of him. With that, the professor tells the students with bad grades to sit at the front, and only Will goes there. The young man finds the distance between him and the salamander strange, and the creature starts to get very agitated in the cage. Suddenly, the creature attacks with a blast of fire, but Will defends himself with a frying pan he brought along. The instructor then asks why he was holding a pan, and he says he thought it might be necessary. Without a second thought, the man confiscates the frying pan from the young man, who is baffled by his action. Will finally realizes that all of this was set up for him to fail in class. He understands that they let him participate but have no intention of letting him actually learn. With the book in his hand, he wonders what he should do to handle this unfair situation. Meanwhile, a female student sitting at the back of the room observes the healer with a curious expression. The girl seems a little concerned about the way Will is being treated by everyone. The harassment continued and Opus attacks him with fire once again, saying his hand slipped by accident. And in class, the professor questions him about something he hasn't learned and even deducts points for it. And the bullying doesn't stop outside of class as Will finds trash thrown right at his room door. The dorm supervisor confronts him, saying he heard about the commotion, and as punishment the young man will go without dinner. Lying in his bed, Will sighs tiredly as he is facing a lot of opposition at the academy. The young man feels he still has a mountain of challenges to overcome, and the road will be long. Even so, he knows he is progressing little by little and will not let the harassment get to him. Then he remembers fighting with his own hands for the first time and achieving victory. With a look full of determination, Will believes he can become an attack mage. He then gets up and decides to review the day's lesson as he has finally gotten his textbook. The next day, Will arrives in the classroom and notices that he is completely alone in the place. The young man looks at the clock and realizes it's already past time, but the instructor has not yet appeared. The same girl from before realizes that the news about the classroom change was hidden on purpose. Annoyed by the situation, the student slams her hand on the desk and decides there is no point in waiting there anymore. Will then approaches the girl to talk to her, and the young woman responds surprised. The healer asks if the next classroom has changed and realizes it was exactly as he imagined. Will understands that since he is hated by everyone, the classroom change was done on purpose to disadvantage him. The girl then says she is also on team hated and gives him a little smile. With that, she suggests that since they are two loners, they should get along, and Will notices her words are sharp, while smiles and extends his hand, saying he is happy to have a friend, leaving the young woman surprised. The young woman then shakes his hand awkwardly and agrees to the friendship. Then the girl introduces herself and reveals her name is Erica Glenn. Erica says there is nothing to be done since he hasn't been attending classes, and on top of that, he is a healer. She also comments that everyone around here says healers are weak, leaving the young man serious. The young man then jokes, saying he is an attack mage but still has no friends. Will thinks that the discrimination against his class is very strong and attack mages always look down on them. He remembers that in his past life he was the kingdom's healer, and that is why he was treated that way. So he understands that in an attack academy he will have to fight against this discrimination. Erica remains silent, observing Will, who seems very thoughtful. Then the girl asks Will why he decided to come to Schwarz Academy. Will is a little surprised by the question and reflects on the reason. With all seriousness, he replies that he realized being born a healer is not a reason to run from a fight. The young man says he has his own reasons and then asks Erica why she decided to join the academy. With that, the girl says she came from a very small noble family that lives in the countryside of the kingdom. She explains that her parents had no sons, and to save her family she decided to become an attack mage. Will agrees and says that if she graduates from Schwarz Academy it is entirely possible, but the young woman laments that she has no talent for attack magic, and that is why the classes are terrible for her. Then with a smile on her face, the girl corrects herself and says at least she made a friend here at the academy. The young woman says that with him around she won't feel bad about her grades and offers to help him with his studies. Will smiles, thinks that things may not happen the way Erica expects. The young man then calls her to go find the right classroom, as the real class must have already started. With that, the two leave the empty room and Erica follows him without really understanding what is happening. After walking a bit through the academy hallways, Will finally finds the correct classroom, but as soon as they enter the room, the instructor shouts that the two of them are very late. Will then apologizes and explains that he didn't know about the classroom change, and Erica does the same, but with a look of contempt. The man says he doesn't want to hear any of their excuses. With a wicked smile on his face, he says that since they are here he has something for them. The professor then points to a magic circle on the board and tells Will to answer the question. Erica gets worried and says there is no way he knows the answer since he has barely attended classes. Will just stares at the situation in silence without showing any concern. The man says that if he gets it right he will forgive the tardiness, but if he gets it wrong he will lose points in the subject. With this, Opus and his friend laugh, and the blonde says that at this rate the healer will fail on the spot. The young man then approaches the board, picks up a piece of chalk, and leaves the instructor very surprised with his attitude. With the chalk in his hand, he prepares to show everyone that he knows the answer to the question. He starts writing on the board and Opus shouts that it's a useless effort, while Erica is shocked. The young man continues to write the magic formula with a skill that no one expected from him. He then finishes writing, and the formula glows with an intense blue light on the blackboard. With a confident smile, Will turns to the professor and asks what he thought. The man is completely shocked and approaches the board to analyze the answer up close. He can't believe what he is seeing because the young man's answer was perfect. With nothing to do, the professor admits that the answer is correct, and Opus is left with his mouth wide open. Erica is super impressed and wonders how he knew the answer, while Will just smiles. The girl asks how he knew the answer, and Will just gives a very confident smile. After class, some students call out to Will while he talks with his new friend. Erica then asks how he managed to solve that problem, and he says it was just an application from the textbook. Will explains that he had already read that part in the book, and the girl is completely shocked by the revelation. With that, she asks if he read the book by himself, and the young man confirms that he did, leaving the young woman even more surprised. The healer says he read the book for the first time the day before, and that the academy's material is really amazing. He thinks that the books cover everything from the basics to the advanced in a very organized and waste-free way. Will also remembers that he was good at theoretical studies in his past life, and that helps him understand attack magic. He then says he got so excited learning that he stayed up reading late into the night without even realizing it. Erica panics because the material is super difficult and wonders if he wasn't supposed to be a failure. The girl falls into despair and says that now she will be the last in the class and get bullied. Will then puts his hand on her shoulder and says it's okay because he will teach her what she doesn't understand. With a very kind smile, the young man reminds her that they are friends and should help each other. The young woman's eyes fill with tears of happiness, and she thanks him very much for his help. Will thinks that he didn't come to the academy to make friends, but having Erica around will help him a lot. The healer then asks for a favor in return and says that the classes are not just theoretical, and Erica remembers the next subject. She says it's the class he was banned from, but since he beat Opus she thinks he will do well. But Will reveals that he still can't use general offensive magic, leaving the girl confused. With a confident smile, the young man says that despite this he already has an idea to solve the problem. So Will explains that is why he needs Erica's help for his plan to work. The scene then cuts to the training courtyard, and all the students are lined up waiting for the professor. The young man explains that attack magic is divided into two types: general magic and unique magic. General magic is based on formulas that have already been analyzed so anyone can use them. Unique magic, on the other hand, is created by the user themselves, and therefore only that person can use the spell. With this, Will understands that the Academy's curriculum teaches both types of magic to the students. He thinks he can use his offensive healing in unique magic classes because there is no right answer, but the young man knows that for general magic classes he needs to use the normal spells to pass. The instructor stares at him and says his theoretical studies are going well, but practice is another story. Will replies yes with a very determined look and without fear of the challenge ahead. The man points to a target and says the task is the same as before, to hit it with a fireball. With a wicked smile, the professor warns him that if he can't even do the basics he won't graduate. The man remembers that in the mock battle he used healing magic to improve his movements. Even so, he is sure that Will can't use general offensive magic and watches him approach. He wishes that an incompetent like him would just get out of his class, while Will gives a little smile. With this, the instructor is confused and wonders why the young man was smiling in that situation. Suddenly the man is completely shocked and his eyes widen in surprise. Then to everyone's astonishment, Will creates a fireball in his hand, and the professor shouts, asking how he did that. The healer gives a smirk and thinks that his plan worked and no one discovered his secret. In a flashback, we see Will and Erica alone in the empty classroom planning something. The plan begins with Erica creating a fireball using her general offensive magic. Then Will takes the fireball and places it inside a salamander tail he brought. The young man explains that he keeps healing the tail so it doesn't burn, while Erica asks if it isn't hot. Erica is impressed and wonders if that is even possible. While questioning who he really is, he continues to explain that before releasing the fire he activates the tail's flame sac with his healing. Back in the present, Will throws the fireball with all his might towards the target. The fireball flies straight and hits the target dead on, which was quite far away. With a victorious smile, Will turns and asks the professor what he thought. The man can't believe it and wonders if that young man really learned how to use attack magic. With no choice, he says that he passed the task, and the healer thinks him very satisfied. Erica is super happy and shocked at the same time, while the other students don't understand anything. But Opus has a look of pure hatred because his plan to humiliate the healer went wrong. Later, the bully goes to confront the professor and asks what is going on. He says he wants to know too, but the blonde doesn't care about that and yells at the man. Opus says it is unbearable to have a healer in the same class and threatens to tell his father everything. With this, the instructor becomes desperate because he knows the boy's threat is very serious. The bully then tells him to get rid of Will no matter what and leaves. The man is left alone in the classroom, feeling the full pressure of the situation on his shoulders. He thinks it is risky to do something outside of class and remembers all his effort to become a professor. But to protect his position, the instructor decides he will have to take a risk and take action. The man then decides he will not let a 15-year-old healer ruin his life and will act. After class, the instructor calls Will to the training courtyard and he asks for the reason. The man says he seems very confident lately, and the young man thanks him, but he says it wasn't a compliment. With that, he accuses him of missing several classes and asks how he plans to make up for the lost time. Will has a bored look on his face and thinks that all of this is the professor's own fault. He then explains that he learned the material from his classmates and by studying on his own, so there are no problems. But the professor says that he is not the one who decides that and that make-up classes are mandatory. He continues to explain that the content of the make-up class is decided by the responsible instructor, so with a malicious look the man decides that the class will be a mock battle against him. The healer is surprised and wonders about a battle between a professor and a student. He says he will give him an advantage, and if Will lands one hit, he will consider him passed. The instructor taunts him, asking if he will run away with such an easy condition, and the young man stays quiet. The man thinks that with his magic the young man's attacks will never reach him. He believes that after a good beating, Will understand the difference in strength and will obey him. With a determined look, Will accepts the challenge and says he will do the fight. The professor gives a very satisfied smile as his plan to get rid of him is working. The instructor shouts that he will begin and without wasting time launches his spell with all his might. Will remembers seeing his magic once before when he stopped his fight against Opus. His spell makes the ground rise, and the young man prepares to dodge the imminent attack. A giant earth pillar emerges at high speed and Will manages to jump to the side just in time. The young man manages to dodge by a hair, and the pillar scrapes past him with full force. With a quick movement, Will dodges his powerful attack once more. He is then surprised by the strength and speed of his professor's magic. The earth pillar hits the ground with absurd force, showing all its destructive power. With a wicked smile, the man asks why he is only dodging the attacks. Will realizes that his magic is super fast because it uses the existing ground and that he is much stronger than Opus. Despite all the difficulty, the healer does not give up and prepares to act. He then uses his enhanced speed to dodge several earth spikes that emerge from the ground. Taking advantage of an opening, the young man runs with all his might towards the instructor to try and attack. Will then places his hands on the ground and begins to chant a mysterious spell. With this, he creates two earth pillars to protect himself and advances between them to attack, but the instructor creates a huge earth wall right in front of him to block his attack. With a wicked smile on his face, he thinks the young man has no chance against his magic. Unexpectedly, Will jumps over the wall with a sword in hand, catching him by surprise. He then prepares to attack with all his strength and tries to land a direct hit on the professor. The blow lands squarely, but the man creates an earth armor around himself to protect himself. As a result, the young man's sword can't even scratch his defense as the armor is very resistant. Will quickly retreats to dodge a counter attack of earth spikes that the professor launches. The man calls him pathetic and says that with that strength he will never break his earth armor. The young man thinks that he has never heard of healing used for attack and that his is just a cheap imitation. He then calls out to him and the professor laughs, saying it's ridiculous for him to try to be an attack mage. Will explains that with healing he studied the human body and learned that people limit themselves because the body can't handle its own full power and will break if it goes past the imposed limit. The man gets angry and says he won't listen to excuses, but Will tells him to listen carefully. He explains that even if you remove the limiter, the body does not come out unscathed when using more power, but the healer says he doesn't care if his arm breaks because he can heal himself instantly. The instructor is completely shocked by the young man's attitude and doesn't know what to say. He says that won't be enough to break his armor, but Will challenges him to see the result. With a wicked smile, Will concentrates an absurd amount of energy in his fist. The professor then becomes terrified seeing the immense power he is about to unleash. Will then lands a punch with all his might right in the instructor's face, breaking his armor. The blow sends him flying to the ground, leaving him bleeding and completely defeated. With that, Will says it's not good for a professor to decide his students' limits. He remembers Veronica's words and understands that nothing is more foolish than thinking something is impossible. The healer looks at his injured hand and knows he can heal himself and become even stronger. With a determined look, the young man clenches his fist, feeling the power he has just awakened. He remembers dodging his attacks and realizes how much he has evolved in such a short time. After the attack, Will kneels tiredly and the professor gets up with difficulty. With a look of pure hatred, the man adjusts his glasses and refuses to accept his defeat. The healer then stands up and asks if he passed the class since he managed to land a blow, but the instructor shouts that there are no witnesses and that the fight was worthless because he won't keep his word. Furious, the instructor shouts that a healer landed a blow on him and prepares to counter attack with everything he has. With that, he uses his magic and creates a huge crystal barrier, saying he will never acknowledge defeat. Will sighs and says that removing limiters is not just for punching. Then a green energy begins to emanate from the young man's feet, showing that he used the ability on his legs. The young man then dashes forward with absurd speed and dodges the crystal attack with great ease. The professor is completely shocked as he appeared in front of him in the blink of an eye. Will thinks that his earth armor won't be able to form in time to defend him. The man stares at the young man with wide eyes, unable to believe his speed. At that moment, he realizes something very strange is happening because everything seems different. The instructor then wonders why his movements suddenly stopped right in front of him. He soon realizes he can't move either and is paralyzed as the punch approaches. The man finally understands what happened and despairs as the flow of time has slowed down. Will feels the pressure of the technique and thinks he needs to stop soon as the pain is immense. As the punch advances in slow motion, the professor feels a pain that won't stop increasing. He then realizes that feeling a punch like that is many times worse than a normal hit. The instructor thinks he can't take it anymore and that he can't even run or scream in pain. Finally, time returns to normal and he is sent flying by the force of the young man's punch. The blow launches him backward, leaving a trail of destruction across the courtyard. With that, the man falls to the ground completely defeated and with no strength to continue the fight. Will then heals himself and says that for him all of that was just an instant. He asks what Will did and the young man says he will explain because he is not like the other professors. He reveals that at the moment of the punch he used a sensory enhancement spell on him. The young man explains that the spell is to heal vision, but he uses it to increase his reaction in combat. As a result, his senses were sharpened and 1 second seemed to last 1,000 seconds. The healer asks if he understands understood how painful it is to be hit in that state and he is speechless. With a wicked smile he asks if he can pass the make-up class and he agrees in fear. Will holds him by the shoulders and says he has one more thing to say to him before he goes. He knows his discrimination won't disappear but warns him not to get in his way. With a terrifying look the young man says he will learn the painful consequences if he gets in his way. The man is terrified and the healer says he just wants to attend classes without being bothered. With a very cheerful smile the young man asks if the professor will grant his request. The scene then cuts to the academy building as the sun sets on the horizon. The instructor walks alone and wonders what kind of person Will is. He thought all healers were weak and should obey attack mages, but he realizes Will is different as he has great combat ability and an overwhelming will. At that moment the bully appears in the hallway and watches the professor approaching. With a smile on his face the blonde asks if the healer's make-up training is over. He gives a very satisfied smile as he thinks this means Will is closer to being expelled, but the instructor loses his patience and shouts at the top of his lungs for him to shut up. He then grabs him and with a furious look tells him not to get involved with Will anymore. The man warns that this is for his own good and that thinking of the young man as a simple healer is a mistake. The bully gets angry and says that wasn't what he wanted to hear and threatens to tell his father everything, but the professor is unfazed and with a serious expression tells him to go ahead and do what he wants. He then questions him saying that if he had so much influence it would make more sense to expel the healer. The instructor also states that it is more likely the young man will show his claws to them in the future. The instructor turns his back on him and leaves him alone in the hallway without another word. With that the blonde gets furious and punches the hallway wall with all his might. He then screams in rage because he couldn't get rid of Will and his plan went wrong. A few days later the healer is at his desk after another quiet class. The young man stretches and celebrates because he can finally have some peace at the academy. He notices that the professor warned Ulpus because now the bully just glares at him with anger. With this Will can focus on his classes, but he knows he can't be content with so little. He remembers the tragic future and knows he needs to get much stronger. He thinks using healing for physical enhancement was a good idea but it's a very simple method. The young man realizes his intimidation technique has limits and he needs a new way to fight. Will then explains his plan to Professor Veronica and asks what she thinks of his idea. The white-haired girl listens to him with a very serious expression and seems to be analyzing the situation. But before answering the professor asks to say one thing first to the young man. Will agrees and asks what she wants to say as it seems to be something important. With a smile on her face Veronica congratulates him and says he did very well in the fight. She reveals that he has become the talk among the professors and that keeping up with classes is already a great achievement. But the young woman says that many professors did not like the situation and the young man feels a bit awkward. He then asks if she is keeping it a secret that she was the one who gave him the advice. Veronica explains that she doesn't talk much with the other professors and that is why she stands out among them. With this Will is relieved and thanks her for help as he would feel bad if he caused problems. The white-haired girl says she doesn't care and that she is actually the one who is grateful. She reminds him that healers don't usually put theory into practice like he does. The professor then draws her sword with a very determined look and prepares to fight. The young woman says she was curious to know how a healer who actually fights would fare. The healer is surprised and asks what she is doing, but the girl seems very determined. She says she wants to know his level now because he wants advice to get stronger. Will tries to argue but Veronica reminds him that on the battlefield there is no time to wait. Without a second thought the professor charges forward with absurd speed and attacks him with her sword. Will is scared by her speed but prepares to defend against the blow. The white-haired girl attacks with a powerful strike and the young man defends with his makeshift sword. The impact of the blow shatters Will's sword into several pieces instantly. The two then begin an intense exchange of blows and the white-haired girl shows all her skill. Will thinks that even with his enhanced reaction, he can barely keep up with her attacks. He realizes that Veronica is not just fast but her movements are so perfect that she doesn't need to stop. The healer knows that just forcing his physical abilities has a limit and he needs a plan. He understands he will only get one chance and needs to use a speed he hasn't shown yet. Will then decides he will have to catch the professor completely by surprise. Then the young man jumps high and concentrates a large amount of energy in his makeshift weapon. Veronica is surprised to see a golden beam of energy coming from the young man's sword. The healer imbues the sword with his healing magic, leaving the weapon with an intense glow. With that he attacks with a powerful blow but the professor defends with mastery. Will then observes the result of his attack and sees that his strategy did not work. The tip of his makeshift sword is stuck in the ground completely useless for the fight. Will then gives an awkward laugh as his plan failed and his weapon broke. Veronica then sheathes her sword, satisfied with the result of the training in the fight. The professor is impressed and says she didn't expect to be forced to use her magic sword with him being so calm. She says his skill is top tier for his age, and Will thanks her but states it is still not enough. With that, the white-haired girl likes his ambition and asks if physical enhancement alone does not satisfy him. The young man confirms and says that no matter how much he removes the body's limiter, there will always be a limit. She says that healing must have other applications, and the healer says he thought about it, but nothing seems to work. With that, the professor says he lacks real combat experience, as ideas born from experience are what he seeks. She then asks if he noticed anything in their fight, and the young man realizes she is right. The young man then asks if they should continue with the battles, but she says there will be a monster subjugation training. He is surprised by the live training and recalls that in his past life there was this joint event between 3 academies. The first is Schwar's Academy, specializing in offensive magic, and where Will is. The second is Halich Academy, which specializes in healing magic, and where he studied in his past life. And finally, Zilbern Fencing Academy, which is focused on sword combat. In this event, the students form groups and accept real requests, but he remembers he did not participate in his past life. But in this life, he will defeat monsters and change the future of destruction he already knows. With a determined smile, Will prepares himself, as this will be his first monster subjugation. Veronica stares at him seriously and seems to be analyzing the situation carefully. She warns him that to participate in the event, he needs to prove his skill in a selection exam. The professor says there is a rumor that there is a prodigy among this year's freshmen. She then challenges him to get first place among his peers to prove his worth. Will asks how the exam works, and she explains that the candidates fight each other. Every year about 100 students volunteer, but only a few are selected, and the young man thinks the school is all about fighting. He remembers that at Halich few volunteered and thinks this attitude is typical of Schwarz. The young man remembers his old academy and wonders what his master is doing now. Veronica warns that the prodigy has already surpassed the level of some professors, so first place will not be easy. With that, Will asks if she has ever met this talented student. She explains that the young man avoids professors and probably looks down on them for being better than them. The white-haired girl then offers to help him with his training for the exam. Will gets super excited and accepts her help with a huge smile. Time passes and the day of the long-awaited academy selection exam finally arrives. The healer walks with a determined look as the exam day arrived in the blink of an eye. He thinks he has done all the preparation possible, and now he just needs to execute his plan. Suddenly, a mysterious voice calls out to him, and the young man turns to see who it is. To his surprise, the person was the academy headmaster Arnilam Golagran, who greets him. The old man says his granddaughter is well, and Will is happy to hear the news. Arnilam apologizes for not having checked on how he was doing and asks about his difficulties. Will replies that it was difficult at first, but now everything is perfectly fine. The young man also reveals that he is aiming for first place in the exam, and the headmaster is very confident. But a muscular man nearby overhears the conversation and thinks the whole thing is a joke. With a contemptuous smile, he wonders how someone like Will can aim for first place. He introduces himself as the training supervisor and says he needs to have a word with the rookie. Will recognizes him as he has met him in his past life and knows who he is. He remembers that this man was a first-class offensive mage in the Great War, but Will does not have good memories of him as the supervisor grabs him angrily. The man says that fighting is a world of talent and that training is just a detail. With a look of pure contempt, he states that being a healer means having no chance of winning. Will stares at the man with a serious look, unfazed by his provocations. The headmaster then intervenes and says the exam will start soon, so there is no reason to argue there. But the muscular man says the young man will have to face the academy prodigy named Sirius. At that moment, a white-haired student approaches and the supervisor gives a very confident smile. This young man is Sirius Blue Note, the prodigy everyone was talking about and who has surpassed even the professors. Will observes him very carefully as he knows he will be a great challenge to overcome. The young man understands that this is the prodigy and the opponent he needs to defeat to reach the top. With that, the two stare at each other and a silent rivalry begins to emerge between them at that moment. The headmaster then says it is good to have hot blood, but it is time for everyone to go to the exam. Then the students gather and walk towards the place where the test will finally take place. They arrive at a giant arena full of training dummies for the skill test. All the participants line up inside the arena and Will is in the middle of them. He then sees his friend Erica there and is surprised, but she says she only participates to not lose her allowance. Meanwhile, Opus and his friends observe Will and his friend from a distance with contempt. The healer smiles and comments that her situation is very difficult even if she doesn't want to participate. The headmaster is proud of the number of volunteers and tells everyone to release their enthusiasm in the fight. He then explains that this is the preliminary round and only those who are left standing at the end will go to the main selection. Will thinks that a survival battle with 100 people will make the place very crowded, but the headmaster says not to worry about space and hits his staff on the ground, activating a magic. With that, a huge magic circle emerges from the ground and begins to envelop all the students at once. Suddenly everyone is transported to a place that looks like outer space, and they are completely confused. The headmaster's staff glows intensely as he prepares to finish the teleportation spell. From above, the old man casts his magic, and all the students are sucked into a portal of light that has opened. Will then appears alone in the middle of a very dense and unknown forest. He looks around and soon recognizes the place as the forest on the outskirts of the academy. A voice then echoes through the place explaining that everyone has been teleported to random points. The voice continues saying they can avoid the strong or cooperate, but Erica has already run into a monster. Sirius, on the other hand, seems to have had more luck as he appeared in a much quieter place. Will is impressed as a teleportation magic for so many people is something completely absurd, and with that the headmaster's voice officially declares the start of the selection exam for the training. With that, Will decides his first step is to find a good place to hide. Without wasting time, he climbs one of the tallest trees to get a better view of the battlefield. Then Will uses his magic to suppress his vital activity and completely conceal his presence. From the top of the tree, the young man soon notices a strange movement and sounds of fighting coming from nearby. He then sees some students fighting a stone golem in the middle of a clearing in the forest. One of the students summons a golem and sends it to attack the other participants who were there. With that, a girl defends herself using a giant magic hammer to crush the stone creature. To help in the fight, another student uses ice magic to try to freeze the golem and stop it. Will observes everything and thinks this is a great chance to see various types of magic. With a smile on his face, he sees one of the spells and decides he wants to learn how to use it too. Sometime later, the healer has already defeated the other students and now only the golem master is left. The young man celebrates thinking his golem defeated the other two and brags about his strength, but Will appears right behind him and says he saw everything that happened there. Before the student could react, Will places his hand on his face preparing to attack. He then uses a consciousness blocking technique to knock out the young man instantly. The blow lands squarely and the student faints on the spot with his eyes rolled back. With that, the young man falls to the ground completely defeated with no chance to react. He explains that he can manipulate the opponent's life force flow to make them faint. The young man says that this way he can incapacitate enemies without causing unnecessary injuries. Will is happy because the technique he created during his training with Professor Veronica worked well. Suddenly he feels a presence approaching and turns to see what it is. At that moment, several swords are thrown in his direction and stick into the ground around him. One of the swords is giant and Will is surprised by that type of magic. The healer then sighs tiredly as he already knows who is behind that attack. With a smile on his face, Opus appears and says it seems Will still hasn't learned his lesson. The bully says he doesn't know what he is talking about and that he is just trying to pass the exam. Opus then tells his friends to use all their power and the healer realizes it is 3 against 1. The blonde starts the attack and uses his knife creation magic to surround Will. Then one of his friends enchants one of the knives with a very powerful poison magic, and to finish it off, the other companion uses a duplication magic to create several copies of the weapons. The bully brags that the knives are poisoned and infect with just a touch and challenges him to block them all. With that, a shower of poison knives flies with full force towards Will, who stands still. The healer thinks he can cure the poison, but knows it will be difficult to dodge everything with just physical enhancement. But with a confident smile, he prepares a healing magic in his hand as he already has a plan in mind. He then positions himself next to the golem that had been on the ground since the previous fight. Suddenly a wave of energy repels all the knives and Opus is completely shocked by the scene. The bully can't believe it and shouts, asking what that magic he has never seen before is. To everyone's surprise, the golem stood up and used its body as a shield to protect Will. The young man explains that healing magic only works on living beings, but the golem uses the master's blood as a medium. With this, he can give vitality to the creature and control it using his pseudo-life imbuement technique. The golem then charges with full force towards the bully's group, who are surprised by the attack. Without mercy, the creature lands a powerful punch right in the stomach of one of the blonde's friends. The other guy has no better luck and is thrown to the ground while the golem pummels him. Opus is shocked to see his friends being defeated so easily and yells at them for it. Taking advantage of the distraction, Will appears right in front of the bully, who is terrified. With no chance of defense, Will uses the same technique as before and grabs the blonde's face forcefully. With a victorious smile, the young man tells him to sleep well and knocks him out with his consciousness block. After that, he continues to use the golem to fight against other students while watching everything from a distance. Will thinks that the creature compensates for his weakness in close combat and helps him observe others. With this, the young man remains focused on analyzing every attack magic that the other students use in the fight. Suddenly, a giant tornado of wind starts to destroy everything in its path with absurd power. Will is surprised by the force of that attack and wonders what just happened there. The tornado charges with full force in his direction, and the healer doesn't even have time to think about running. With the force of the impact, the young man is sent flying and the tree he was in is completely destroyed. The attack is so strong that it carves a path of destruction through the entire forest, leaving nothing standing. After the dust settles, Will's golem is in pieces on the ground along with another defeated student. The scenery around him is completely devastated and the forest has turned into a battlefield. Looking towards the end of the trail of destruction, Will sees a person standing in the distance. It was Sirius, the academy prodigy, and the young man realizes it will not be easy to defeat him. With a determined look, Will crouches down as he knows it is time to test his new ability. But before the fight could begin, the headmaster's voice echoes through the place and says that is enough. With that, the preliminaries are over and the 4 students left standing are considered passed. The main competition will be in the arena the next day, and the headmaster activates the magic to transport them back. While they wait for the teleportation, Will and Sirius stare at each other from a distance with challenging looks. The prodigy stares at the healer with a serious expression and seems to be looking forward to tomorrow's fight. With a confident smile, Will realizes that neither of them can wait for the final battle. The scene cuts to a falling tree showing the destructive power that was used in the forest. Back in his room, Will studies and prepares for the main selection that will take place the next day. He wonders what he should do to prepare for the fight, as he knows the challenge will be great. Elsewhere, the bully's friends question him and ask if he hasn't had enough yet. One of them says the healer is very strong and that he even healed them while they were unconscious. But Opus shouts that his family's teaching says that being underestimated by a healer is unforgivable. The blonde then becomes thoughtful and wonders what his father would say if he found out about his defeat. Seeing their friend's attitude, the 2 young men have expressions of weariness and disapproval. With that, they decide they don't want to get hurt anymore and abandon the bully, who is shocked. With that, the 2 young men turn their backs and leaving the bully alone in the hallway. But with a look of pure rage, she says that even without magic power, there is a way to get rid of the healer. Meanwhile, Will is in his room studying peacefully for the next phase of the exam. Suddenly, he hears a knock on the door and is surprised as he wasn't expecting visitors. With that, the young man gets up and wonders who could be at this time of night. He then opens a crack in the door and feels a bad premonition about who is on the other side. And to his surprise, it was Opus, who greets him with a very fake smile on his face. Will then asks what he is plotting, but the blonde says he just wants to have a peaceful conversation. With that, the bully is very honest and admits he hates healers and has tried to get him expelled several times. He remembers his plans that went wrong and how Will always turn the tables on him. With a wicked smile on his face, he says he should have been more direct from the beginning. Then, with a serious and threatening look, the bully tells Will to leave the academy once and for all. The healer then asks why he hates him so much, but the blonde replies that he doesn't need a reason to despise healers. He says that in his family, anyone born a healer is sent far away and that his older brother was useless. In a flashback, he remembers how people mocked his brother and he just smiled like an idiot. Opus recalls how proud attack mages and pathetic healers are nothing alike. Will then understands that this is the ingrained teaching of noble families. The bully then says that when he understands this, he will leave the academy because it is no place for healers. The healer asks if he really thinks he will give up, and the blonde guarantees he will make him say it. With a wicked smile, the bully threatens him and reminds him that he also has a family he cares about. Will is confused by the threat and doesn't understand what he means. The blonde reveals that he had him investigated and knows he was raised with his sister and that they have a strong bond, and threatens him, saying that if he gives the order, what happens to her will depend solely on Will's imagination. The bully asks if he has decided, and Will confirms that he has. When the blonde tells him to pack his things, Will grabs him by the neck with all his might. The healer then lands a punch right in the bully's face, sending him flying. With the blonde on the ground, Will gets on top of him and holds his arm tightly. He starts to twist the bully's arm, who screams in pain, asking him to stop because it's breaking. With a cold look, the young man says he already warned him that he had made his decision. The bully screams desperately in pain as Will continues to twist his arm. With that, the bully is left on the floor panting and crying in pain, unable to move an inch. The blonde then threatens him, saying that the academy and his father won't let the broken arm slide. But Will uses his healing magic and says it's okay because he has already healed his arm. The bully is completely completely confused by the young man's action and asks what he is trying to do. Without a second thought, the healer starts to break the bully's arm again, who screams in pain. Will continues to twist the young man's arm, who writhes on the ground, unable to do anything. Then with a smile on his face, Will heals the blonde's arm once again, leaving him confused. And then he breaks the bully's arm again while the young man screams for him to stop. The healer says he would have let it go if it were about him, but threatening his sister is very different. With a terrifying look, he vows that he will not forgive him and that he will break his spirit for good. Lying on the ground and terrified, the bully wonders what kind of person Will is. He then realizes that Will is a devil in a healer's clothing and that this is worse than anything. The scene then cuts to the academy at night and Will wishes Ulpus a good night. From his room door, Will reminds him of the promise not to mess with him anymore, and the bully is traumatized. Back in his room, the young man stretches and feels refreshed for tomorrow's competition. The next day, the main tournament is about to begin and the arena is packed with spectators. From his seat of honor, Headmaster Arnilim observes everything with a very serious and thoughtful expression. Beside him, the supervisor and Professor Veronica also watch eagerly for the start of the battles. The four finalists face each other in the arena, and Will says he didn't expect his opponent to make it this far. And to everyone's surprise, the healer's first opponent is his friend Erica, who looks very nervous. She explains that she only survived by surrounding herself with walls of fire without defeating anyone, and he finds that rare. With that, the young man wonders if a defensive strategy like that can really take her far in the tournament. Erika then asks him to go easy on her since they are friends, but the healer refuses on the spot, and she already expected that. The girl then becomes determined because she has already secured her allowance, but now she will fight for a better evaluation. With that, the battle finally begins and the other two finalists are already defeated in the arena. Without wasting time, Erika concentrates a large amount of energy and prepares a powerful fire spell. She then launches a huge wave of flames that charges with full force towards Will. The attack hits the young man squarely and a large fire explosion occurs right in the middle of the arena. But he thinks the spell is standard and the power is low enough for his healing to handle it easily. With that, he prepares to disperse the flames, but suddenly notices something very strange about her attack. He realizes something is wrong because the flames are not going out even with his healing. The healer tries to disperse the flames, but they continue to burn with the same intensity. Erika then shouts that she will keep attacking and launches another fireball towards him. With a quick movement, Will dodges the attack, but the flames continue to follow him. He then wonders if this is Erika's unique magic because the flames won't go out at all. The girl explains that even with medium firepower, her magic has an abnormally long duration and is dangerous. Will remembers that he used Erika's magic to create the fireball and the flame lasted a long time because of the salamander tail. He understands that her strategy of creating a wall of fire can work if no one can get through. Will thinks that this shows his friend Erika's persistent personality. With that, the crowd goes wild and everyone starts cheering for Erika to defeat the healing mage. The girl is surprised by the cheering and wonders if she will really be able to defeat Will. With that, she fills with confidence and challenges him to surrender as she made it through the preliminaries, but Will says it's okay because he will counterattack and that he can extinguish the fire by increasing his healing power. With all determination, Erika launches another fire attack, saying she will hit him this time, but with a confident smile, Will seems to have a plan to turn the tables in his favor. Will then realizes that if the flames won't go out, he can simply grab them. With that, he decides to use her own fire to attack and creates two flaming fists in his hands. The girl is completely shocked as she never imagined he could use her flames in that way. Without a second thought, the healer charges with full force towards his friend to finish the fight. Erika panics as she knows there is no way to defend against her own fire power. He then tells her to give up and prepares to land a blow with his flaming fist. With a single blow, the young man defeats her and the girl falls to the ground completely powerless to continue. With that, the fight ends and the announcer declares that the winner of the match is Will. Even with the victory, Will realizes that the evaluation of healing mages has not changed at all. From the ground, Erika yells at the other finalists for giving up and calls them pathetic excuses for attack mages. But upon seeing Will, she changes her attitude and apologizes for getting carried away in the fight. The healer then helps her up and tells her not to worry as she fought very well. He heals her and says there is still a chance for her to pass the repechage for the next phase. The girl is very moved by her friend's attitude and calls him by his name Will. But suddenly the supervisor appears and says her chance is over because he will not allow her to continue. Will is shocked and the girl shouts the supervisor's name, which is Bode. With a contemptuous smile, the man tells Will to think carefully about the situation. He then states with absolute certainty that healing mages are nothing but a bunch of trash. Then the supervisor also says that the other finalist gave up against trash like Will. With an intimidating look, he tells Erika to get out of there and the girl leaves completely terrified. Will then questions him and asks if it is appropriate to speak to students in that way, but Bode says his job is to reprimand the weak and calls it a scolding and encouragement. The supervisor then turns and begins to walk away from Will, who watches him in silence. With a look of pure contempt, attempt. He says that this year it seems only one candidate will be approved. Suddenly Sirius appears behind the healer and says that this whole thing is very annoying. Will is surprised by the prodigy's appearance and Sirius tells him to speak up. With that, Will asks if he feels the same way as Professor Bode about the situation. The prodigy then says that in the end strength is everything and since the supervisor is strong he is right. Will smiles and seems to understand his opponent's point of view, but he says that in his opinion Sirius is not weak either and stares at him challengingly. Sirius then says he wants to be the only one who is right and stares at Will with determination. With that, the healer understands that the final battle will be decided between the two of them right there. Will remembers that in his past life he heard about a very strong offensive mage named Sirius Bluenote. He recalls that the prodigy fought on the front lines and his wind power was feared by all. With his wind magic he did not allow anyone to get close and was unbeatable. His power was so great that everything in his path was reduced to nothing. Back in the present, Sirius concentrates his mana in his hand and prepares for the final battle. The final of the tournament is then announced and the fight between Will and Sirius will finally begin. Will knows that from the supervisor's attitude he will only be recognized if he wins the fight. With a confident smile he guarantees he will win and Sirius agrees to fight with everything he has. The referee then raises his arm and gives the signal for the final battle of the selection exam to begin. Without wasting time, Sirius uses wind magic and creates a whirlwind of air around himself. He then launches a huge tornado of wind that charges with full force towards Will. The healer tries to defend himself, but the power of the attack is so great that he is dragged by the force of the wind. With that, he uses his enhanced physical strength to plant his feet on the ground and resist the tornado, but the force of the tornado is absurd and throws him into the air with full force without him being able to react. Sirius observes everything with a very serious look and seems to be in complete control of the situation. With that, Will is thrown from side to side without any way to escape the attack. The young man then falls to the ground with a thud, feeling the impact of the powerful wind attack. He realizes he can't get close to his opponent because of the wind barrier. The two then stare at each other in a moment of pure tension, and the battle seems far from over. The prodigy says he is fast, but that is just an annoyance to him at the moment. He then prepares to launch a new attack with even more power than the previous one. Without a second thought, the young man launches a gust of wind that covers the entire arena at once. Will realizes that unlike the tornado, this wind blows over a much wider area. With that, he knows that if he does nothing he will be thrown out of the arena and lose the fight. So Will decides it is time to use his new secret ability. He then places his hand on the ground and makes a small tree sapling sprout from nowhere. In an instant, the sapling transforms into a giant forest that blocks all the wind. From the audience, Erica is shocked and wonders if that is also a healing magic. Impressed by the scene, Erica realizes that Will has become even stronger with this new ability. In a flashback, he then asks Professor Veronica what she thought of his new combat technique. A leaf then falls from the sky towards the professor, who observes everything very carefully. With that, a leaf lands right on the professor's head, who is surprised by what just happened. The young man explains that he infused his life energy into the plant to make it grow very quickly. He says he learned about plant-based attack magic and can now adapt his tactics for each type of plant. But suddenly Will feels dizzy and almost falls to the ground from weakness. The professor then catches him so he doesn't fall and helps him recover after using so much power. He then recovers and asks if that is mana exhaustion, but the professor questions if he is alright. The young man gives an awkward laugh and says the book didn't mention it was such a powerful technique. The professor then says it was as expected and Will is confused about what she means. She explains that destroying is easier than healing and that healing magic consumes much more mana than attack magic. With this, Will understands that he needs to choose the right moment to use this powerful ability. Back in the present, he understands that this is the right moment and that he will overcome his disadvantage of not having talent. Meanwhile, Sirius does not waste time and prepares to attack again with his powerful wind magic. The prodigy then launches several wind blades that cut through the trees with ease. With this, Will realizes that his opponent also possesses this type of attack. He analyzes Sirius' techniques and understands that the prodigy has an arsenal of wind magics. The healer acknowledges that his magic is powerful and without openings and that he lives up to his reputation, but with a determined look he clenches his fist because he has decided he will get stronger with his own magic. Without wasting time, he runs with full force towards his opponent to try a direct attack, but Sirius repels him with his wind barrier and says that no matter how many times he tries he will not reach him. With that, the healer is sent flying once again and cannot get close to the prodigy. Then with a confident smile, Will seems to have a plan to surprise his opponent. Sirius is confused by the young man's attitude and doesn't understand what he is planning. Suddenly, a giant root erupts from the ground and hits the prodigy squarely, catching him by surprise. He wonders what that is as he did not expect an attack coming from under the ground. Will then explains that the plant sends its rhizomes underground to grow wherever it wants. With that, the prodigy is injured and feels the pain of his opponent's unexpected attack. The healer then asks if he is worried about Professor Bode as their personalities do not match. From his place place in the stands, the supervisor watches the fight with a serious and concentrated expression. The healer then says that Sirius is from a famous family, and that he follows the professor only because he is strong. The prodigy then reveals that in his family magical ability is everything, and the strongest becomes the leader. He says that is why everyone is an enemy in the battle for succession, and not even his father teaches him magic. With that, Sirius says that obeying the professor is the best way for him to become stronger. The prodigy then says that's enough talk, as his shoulder is hurting from the attack he received. From the audience, Erica and the other students watch the battle, completely shocked by the level of the fight. Back in the arena, Will prepares for the next attack with a very determined look. Sirius then decides to end the fight and summons a giant dragon made of wind and lightning. The prodigy is also taking the fight seriously and will not go easy on Will. Will thinks he was under the impression that attack mages had an easy life, but realizes he was wrong. He then understands that having talent does not make someone superior, and that lineage and past are the same for everyone there. With a confident smile, the healer decides once again that he wants to defeat Sirius. The prodigy is confused by the declaration, and Will says he was just talking to himself. He then places his hand on the ground and summons a special seed for the next phase of the battle. The special seed then begins to sprout, and several huge vines grow at an absurd speed. Will summons Yggdrasil, a giant tree that emerges from the ground with immense power. He explains that this plant drains a lot of mana because it originally takes a long time to grow so much, but the more mana he puts in, the more the tree grows, and Sirius launches a powerful wind attack. The gust of wind hits the tree squarely but doesn't seem to have much effect against the giant plant. The prodigy's wind dragon continues to attack the giant tree that dominates the entire arena. Sirius seems not to care about his shoulder injury and remains fully focused on the battle. With that, the young man throws a branch from the tree into the air, preparing for a new move. He then destroys the branch with his magic, turning it into several smaller pieces in the air. To the prodigy's surprise, the pieces of the branch begin to fall, and he notices something strange. The wood splinters begin to transform into new trees, and Sirius is shocked by the scene. Will explains that the plant has high vitality and grows even from a single branch. The prodigy then realizes that while he controls the dragon, his defense is completely open. At that exact moment, the new trees and roots charge with full force towards him, surrounding him. With no way to defend himself, Sirius is caught by surprise and is trapped on the ground by the tree's roots. With the prodigy immobilized, Will approaches and points a knife to finish the fight. With that, Sirius admits defeat and says he lost the final battle of the tournament. The announcer then declares that the grand winner of the selection exam is Will. In the audience, all the students are shocked and can't believe that a healer defeated Sirius. The prodigy looks down, frustrated with his defeat, but accepts the result of the fight. Will says it was a close call and praises his opponent's strength, but Sirius says that won't cut it. Will is confused by the response and says it was a great match between the two. Suddenly, a mysterious voice says he is disappointed with the result of that fight. Then a huge explosion of purple energy occurs right in the middle of the academy arena. The attack hits Sirius squarely and throws him to the ground completely defenseless. The supervisor Bode then appears and lands a powerful kick on the prodigy, who was already down. He then grabs the young man by the collar and lifts him without any apparent difficulty. With a furious look, the supervisor says that Sirius failed and that he will start his training all over again. All the students in the audience are completely terrified by the professor's attitude. With that, he shouts for the other students to prepare, because the same goes for them. He then shouts that a generation where a healer comes in first place is a complete joke. The students in the audience remain silent and afraid of the professor's attitude, who seems furious. Will then questions him and asks if he is not going too far with the punishment. The healer tries to argue, saying the fight was close and that Sirius was not weak, but the supervisor shouts at him and tells him not to talk back with an expression of pure rage. He then approaches and says there is no such thing as a good fight or potential on the battlefield. The man states that on the battlefield, strength is the result and there is no room for excuses. With that, he says that losing means being treated like trash and being finished, and throws Sirius at another student. Will is shocked by the way the supervisor treats his own disciple. He then says he defeated Sirius and proved his strength, and that being a healer doesn't give him the right to say that. But the supervisor stares at him with a dark look and asks if he thinks he proved anything with that level. The man says that talent is cruel and that soon Will hit his limit and join the weak. He also states that the healer's mana is more depleted than Sirius, and the young man realizes he noticed. With that, the supervisor says that the weak on the battlefield are just dead weight that get others taken out. Will has a serious look, and the words dead weight echo in his mind with force. In a flashback, the supervisor shouts at Will, asking if he is responsible for those dead weights. Back in the arena, the young man calls the supervisor's name, trying to reason with him. He says it is true that healers can't fight, but that they support everyone with their healing magic. The healer also states that if they don't work together, humanity will be completely annihilated, but the supervisor remains silent and does not seem to care about the young man's words. He then reveals that one of his disciples stayed on the front lines to buy time for the rear guard to escape, but the fools in the rear guard were wiped out by weak monsters at their escape point. With that, his disciple perished with nowhere to return to, completely abandoned by his comrades. The supervisor says he couldn't heal him nor even be on the battlefield to fight alongside him. With a look of pure rage, he remembers the tragic end of his disciple. In a fit of fury, he shouts and wonders why Sirius should have to fall for trash like him. Will then thinks that what the professor said was not entirely wrong, because if you are weak you can do nothing. He understands that to fight and protect everyone he needs to fight with his own hands. With that, the young man knows that a time will soon come when the monsters will become even more violent. He then clenches his fist and prepares for the future, because he knows the strong cannot be selfish. With that, he says that people without talent also need to fight and challenges him to acknowledge him if he wins. The supervisor then gives a smirk full of arrogance and contempt for Will. He then tells the other young man to take the trash away and get Sirius out of the arena as soon as the fight begins. The student asks if he is serious, but Bode shouts that he is the one who makes the rules of the exam. With that, the other young man takes Sirius away and Will is furious with the situation. He stares at the supervisor with a determined look and prepares for the fight to come. The young man carrying Sirius seems very tired of all the commotion and the professor's attitude. With that, the special match between Bode and Will is announced to everyone in the academy arena. The referee gives the signal and the fight begins as Bode cracks his knuckles preparing to attack. The supervisor shouts that he will prove how low the young man's level is and concentrates a purple energy in his hands. Will has very low mana as he faces the strongest opponent he has ever fought so far. He knows he can't win in a normal fight, so he decides to start by using his healing magic, but the supervisor is too fast and charges to attack Will without giving him time to react. The healer is surprised by the absurd speed and the purple energy hits him squarely. Bode then unleashes a massive explosion of power that covers the entire arena with his electricity. The attack leaves a huge mark on the ground and the young man is very far from his opponent. With an arrogant smile, the supervisor says he will teach him the 3 reasons why his victory is absolute. He explains that distance, speed, and the power to finish in one blow are the keys to victory. Bode then turns and scoffs, asking if Will can still hear him, but suddenly he wonders where the power that finishes in one blow is and is surprised. From the middle of the smoke, Will appears injured but standing as he managed to survive the attack. Will thinks that he already knew Bode possessed a unique lightning magic. He explains that to minimize the damage he needed to avoid a direct hit to the brain or heart. That is why the young man created a blood circuit in his own body to conduct the electricity. With it, that the electricity entered through his arm and exited through his legs to the ground, but he is at his limit. Kneeling and injured, the healer prepares for a counter attack, but the supervisor just watches him with disdain. Bode then says it seems he barely managed to withstand the blow with a very pathetic effort. Will then tries to use his physical enhancement and a green energy begins to emanate from his body, but suddenly the young man is shocked as something strange is happening to him. Lying on the ground, he wonders why he can't put strength into his body to get up. The supervisor then explains that whoever is hit by his lightning becomes paralyzed and cannot move. Seeing that he is in trouble, the healer throws a crystal he had in his hand to try to defend himself, but Bode catches the crystal with ease and says he will see how many blows the young man can take with the mana he has left. Without a second thought, he launches another explosion of lightning with even more force than the previous one. From the audience, Erica and the other students are completely terrified by the supervisor's power. Amidst the attack, Will grinds his teeth and thinks that his opponent is really very strong. The muscular man acknowledges that his magic is flawless and that is why he acts with such confidence. Despite all the difficulty, Will remains standing and does not give in to defeat. With a look full of determination, the healer shouts that he has already decided he will win the fight. He then places his hand on the ground, preparing to use his last drop of stamina and mana for the final blow. With that, the healer uses his plant manipulation and makes a tree sprout right in front of him. He then shouts for the water treasure tree to grow with all its might, and in an instant a giant tree appears in the middle of the arena, impressing everyone who was there. The young man explains that the tree absorbs a lot of water from the soil, and with that it can disperse the electricity, but the supervisor doesn't seem to care about the strategy and concentrates even more power in his hands. Will is terrified to see the size size of the attack his opponent has prepared, and in the audience all the students are shocked by the supervisor's absurd power. The muscular man then launches his lightning with full force at the tree that the healer created to defend himself. After the dust settles, the tree is completely burnt, and Will can't believe what he sees. Bode then mocks him, asking if that was his last trick, and that ending with a defense is ridiculous. But suddenly the supervisor notices something strange behind the tree, and is very confused by the scene, because several red mushrooms begin to sprout from the ground at an absurd speed. The muscular man is completely shocked and shouts, asking what the heck that is. Will then says he can't believe his plan worked as well as he had hoped. He explains that some plants and mushrooms grow quickly after a lightning strike, and that this was a chance. The healer reveals that this mushroom has another characteristic besides growing quickly with lightning. The training supervisor is completely baffled and wonders what he means by that, but suddenly he realizes that the mushroom spores are spreading throughout the entire arena. With that, the muscular man shouts that his body is paralyzed and he can't move. Then with a victorious smile, Will says that the distance advantage is over for him. Without wasting time, the young man charges forward and prepares a punch with his physical enhancement magic. But Bode gives a wicked smile, as it seems he doesn't mind fighting up close. He then lands a punch with all his might right in Will's stomach, who is shocked. With the impact of the blow, the young man spits out some blood and doesn't understand how he moved. Lying on the ground, the supervisor calls him an idiot and says he is also superior in close combat. He explains that his lightning magic reinforces his body and accelerates his movements, nullifying the paralysis. Will despairs and wonders if even after all this he can't win. With a malicious look, Bode says that all of this means the healer's defeat. He then prepares to deliver the final blow and end the fight once and for all, but suddenly Veronica appears and stops the supervisor's attack with her sword, saying that is enough. The supervisor stares at the sword and asks if the professor isn't going too far with that attitude. With a very serious look, the white-haired girl calls him Professor Bode, showing she will not back down. The muscular man sighs in pure frustration as his fun has just been interrupted. With that, he tells Veronica not to interfere, as she is just a rookie here at the academy. Will, who is on the ground, is surprised by her appearance and calls her name. The professor says the fight is already decided and continuing will only hurt the young man unnecessarily, but Veronica explains that he can only heal himself if he has mana, and the healer has no more strength. Furious, Bode shouts that the young man just lacks courage and unleashes his lightning energy with full force. The white-haired girl says that is nonsense and prepares to fight with her own power aura. Without a second thought, the two charge at each other to start a real battle. They then stare at each other in a moment of pure tension, and Bode asks if she is not going to end this. Suddenly, the academy headmaster appears between the two and interrupts the fight that was about to start. The old man then says it is complete nonsense for two professors to fight in front of all the students. With a gesture, he separates the two professors and puts an end to the commotion that was happening there. The headmaster turns to Bode and tells him to let it go, and the supervisor remains silent. The headmaster stares at the supervisor, who gets very annoyed but can do nothing against his authority. With nothing to do, the muscular man agrees to stop, but he doesn't like the situation at all. The old man then turns to the professor and apologizes for the lack of explanation, leaving the girl confused. With that, he seems to think a bit about how he will resolve the whole mess in the arena. He then announces the end of the selection exam and tells all the students to leave the place immediately. With the headmaster's announcement, all the students begin to leave the arena, and the commotion finally ends. Lying on the ground, Will tries to heal himself but realizes he is out of mana to use his magic. He then becomes frustrated for not being able to heal himself and for not wanting to lose like that. Suddenly, the professor appears and picks up the young man in her arms, leaving him completely surprised by her action. With that, the white-haired girl carries him away while he calls her name, still not understanding anything. She then praises him, saying he fought well and that now he needs to rest to recover. Will listens to his professor's words and seems to reflect on what she just said. With a look of defeat, the healer says he understood and accepts his mentor's advice, but he thinks that fighting well is not enough and that he needs to get much stronger for the future. The scene then cuts to the next day, and we see Will walking through the academy hallways. He then thinks that was the skill of a first-class attack mage and that the level was different. Will remembers that even with such powerful mages, humanity perished and he needs to get stronger. With that, the healer goes to the headmaster's office to talk to him about the exam result. The old man then greets him and is happy to see him there in his office. Aniclimax says his injuries seem fine, and the young man explains he healed himself as soon as his mana returned. The headmaster then reveals that he can participate in the field training, and the young man is surprised. The old man also reveals that Sirius and Erica also passed the exam, leaving the girl shocked. Will is confused as he thought everyone had failed, but the headmaster says this happens every year. He then explains that Bode fails everyone to incite a sense of crisis, but in the end he approves a few. With this, the young man understands that that the field training is dangerous and the supervisor is acting like a professor. Will then thinks it makes sense as the supervisor was a hero who fought to save the world. He remembers that in his past life Bode continued to fight on the front lines for humanity. Back in the present, the headmaster tells him to form a group with students from other schools as an attack mage. With that, he will have to accept real requests for monster subjugation, and the healer seems very serious. Will thinks that since he returned, this will be the first time he will face real monsters. The young man thinks that monsters are just creatures with magical power and that not all are hostile to humans. He remembers that creatures can attack humans just to survive in a natural competition. By understanding their ecology, it is even possible to use them as neighbors in daily life. But Will knows the world will change in 2 years with the appearance of the Red Moon. With this, different species of super monsters will join together to attack humans for pure pleasure, and 2 years after that the Demon King will finally descend to terrorize the entire world. Will recalls that humanity will be at a disadvantage and many nations will perish with the attack. He remembers that attack mages were highly valued, but because of that they ended up perishing one after another. And the same happened to the healers, who did not go to the front lines, but were taken out when it collapsed. So by the time he passed on, there were almost no humans who could fight against the monsters. The young man then clenches his fist with all his might and vows that he will not let that tragedy repeat itself. Will knows he needs to become stronger than anyone in his past life to resist the invasion. With that, he tells the headmaster that if possible, he would like to discover the cause of the red moon that makes monsters ferocious. The old man is impressed by the young man's determination and says he has the same color eyes as when they first met. With that, the headmaster says he seems promising, and the healer thinks the professors are cautious about the training. The old man then says that this is part of the plan, but that he wanted to encourage Will. The young man is completely confused by the situation and what the headmaster was talking about. The scene then cuts to outside the academy, where the students are preparing for the training. There we see the healer talking with Erica and Professor Veronica before leaving. Will seems to be saying goodbye to his new friend before the trip. Suddenly, Supervisor Bode appears walking alongside the prodigy Sirius Blue Note. Will then goes to the muscular man and says he heard that his harsh guidance is for the students' own good. But the supervisor gets annoyed by the comment and glares at Will angrily. He shouts that he doesn't know what the young man is talking about and tells him not to get cocky for winning. With that, the muscular man tells him to do his best in the training and calls him a dummy. But before leaving, the supervisor thanks Will for treating Sirius. The prodigy then appears and says he also wants to thank him for his help in the fight. With a smile, the young man jokes that Sirius is still talking very quietly as always. The prodigy then thanks him again and says that thanks to him, he can strive to become stronger. He explains that Professor Bode taught him that as long as you survive, it is not a defeat. Will says it is good advice and that he will also become stronger, extending his fist to the prodigy. With that, Sirius gives a very confident smile and seems to accept Will's challenge. The two then greet each other with a fist bump, sealing the new and friendly rivalry between them. Sirius thinks it is good to have more skilled attack mages emerging for the future of humanity. He understands that this will be a great advantage in the battles against the monsters to come. From a distance, Erica then calls for Will and says they also need to go to the training. With a very cheerful smile, the young man replies that he is on his way to join them. With that, the carriage travels through the forest and the professor says to review the training details. Inside the carriage, Veronica explains that they will handle a goblin subjugation request. The professor says that 3 students from the academies will form a group of 4 people with a professor. She then reveals that Erica is in the same group as her and the girl finds her professor very intimidating. Veronica comments that Will's group is not bad either, and the carriage finally arrives at its destination. The white-haired girl then tells them to go as the participants from Gilburn have already arrived. The healer thinks that in his past life he did not have many acquaintances from Gilburn Academy. But suddenly a very cheerful and familiar voice calls for Lord Will, catching him by surprise. A blonde girl then hugs him tightly, saying she was looking forward to meeting him. She seems to be very happy with the hug and is blushing all over from the situation. With that, Will gets all awkward while Erica and Veronica watch the scene completely shocked. The healer then tries to pull away and says he has no idea who she is. The young woman lets him go, a bit embarrassed by the situation, and seems to understand what happened. She then adjusts her hair and says they couldn't talk properly last time. With that, the girl introduces herself and reveals her name is Marie Golagran, the headmaster's granddaughter. Will is left with his mouth wide open as he finally recognized the girl. He then remembers that she is the girl he healed at the headmaster's house to get into the academy. The young man then asks how her health has been, and the girl replies that she is perfectly fine. The young man says it is alright as her grandfather recommended him for the academy anyway, but the young woman says she wanted to do something to return the favor he did for her. She says that since she has no talent for magic, she enrolled in Gilburn and studied swordsmanship. With With that, the girl got first place in her academy selection exam, leaving Will shocked. With a smile on her face, she says she seems to have a talent for the sword, and the young man is impressed. Will thinks that going from bedridden to the top in such a short time makes her a real monster. The young woman then holds his hand and reveals that is why they are in the same group. With a confident smile, she guarantees she will be useful to Lord Will, and he agrees to work hard together. The young man then understands what the headmaster meant when he asked him to take care of his granddaughter. Suddenly, someone from Helich arrives, and the girl pulls him excitedly to greet them. Veronica then comments that the two seem very lively, and Erica suggests they also help liven up the group. Will wonders who the other members of the group who have arrived are. Marie then shouts near the carriage and asks if Lords Yulin and Turf are there. With that, the young man is surprised as he knows the name the girl just called. From inside the carriage, a voice tells her not to rush him, and that he is coming out. An elegantly dressed man then steps out of the carriage and onto the grass with his brutes. He introduces himself as Yulin, a professor from Helich Academy, and asks if they will be joining his group. Will is left with his mouth wide open as he knew that man in his past life. He remembers that Yulin was the best healing mage he had ever known and was at the top. With a smirk, the young man is excited to be in the same group as his former master. From inside the carriage, a boy with glasses asks the professor to move as he can't get down. Marie then introduces herself to the young man and calls him Lord Turf, greeting the new group member. With a shy look, the boy greets her back, seeming very embarrassed by the situation, but suddenly he is shocked to see that Will and the girl are holding hands. He then asks who the young man is, and Will introduces himself as Will from Schwarz Academy. Upon hearing this, the boy with glasses realizes the young man is an attack mage and becomes a little scared. Belen then gathers the group and says they can do whatever they want as he will just observe from a distance. Marie is surprised by the professor's attitude, but the healer says it is fine to be like that. The young man then approaches his former master and seems to be following him across the grass. Will then asks if he can call him master, and Yulin is confused and asks why. The young man explains that he can also use healing magic but does not have a professor and wanted to learn from him. Yulin is shocked and wonders if there really is an attack mage who can also use healing magic. He then remembers that someone mentioned something similar and complains that the group division is very arbitrary. The healer asks if it is okay, and the professor says yes and that he can call him whatever he wants. With that, Marie also decides to call him master and runs with the boy with glasses, who tries to stop her. Veronica observes the new group and comments that they are already getting along well and that they cannot lose. The subjugation mission assigns an area to each group, and they will use a cabin as a base. Will says the goblin area is further ahead, so Marie and the master will leave now. The healer then asks the master why he, a healing mage, is going to the front lines. Yulin explains that he is the supervisor and does not follow strict rules, so they can do whatever they want. As the group approaches the goblins, Will says he will take the liberty of doing as he pleases. With a smile, he asks Marie if this freedom is what he is thinking. The girl replies yes with a very cheerful smile and prepares to fight the monsters. Without a second thought, she holds her huge sword firmly ready for combat. With all her strength, the young woman prepares to attack the goblins that were in her path. She then begins to spin her weapon with incredible speed, hitting all the monsters at once. With a quick movement, the girl charges fearlessly towards the group of enemies. After defeating all the goblins, she climbs on top of the pile and strikes a victorious pose for Will. Will then remembers how weak and sick she was in bed, and now the young woman is full of life and energy and happily poses for Lord Will, who saved her.